As a new real estate agent, I know that it's a struggle out there. Not knowing where you're gonna get your first deal from, not knowing when you're gonna get your next paycheck, not knowing what to do your first year, it can be very discouraging. And in this video, I'm telling you all about what my first year in real estate looked like, how much I made from each transaction, how I got my clients, and how much I ended up making that year. But if you're new to my channel, my name is Marvin Alvarado, the Sneakerhead Realtor here in Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm with Real Broker here, and in my channel, I talk about everything you need to know about being a new real estate agent, what your day-to-day looks like as a real estate agent, and just sharing my thoughts and experiences of being a real estate agent here in the state of Utah. So make sure you hit that like button, you hit that subscribe button, so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Now, let's get into the video. So I've been licensed for 4.5 years. I got my real estate license, actually 4 years. I got my real estate license in 2019, about March of 2019. So my first year in real estate, it took me 9 months to close my first transaction. So I did not close my first transaction until the end of the year. About November or so, but between November and December, I ended up closing 3 transactions and ended up the year making about $30,000. Keep in mind, this was before my brokerage split. So my brokerage did take a percentage. I was with Keller Williams, and they took a pretty hefty chunk of my commission every transaction, especially being under their coaching program. But what I want to talk about is my first full year of real estate, which is 2020. Interest rates were low, homes were selling quickly, and people were taking advantage of this. So I'm going to break down all of my deals that I closed this year or that year. I did about 13 deals that year and made 6 figures. So I want to share a little bit about each transaction, like I said, how I got those clients, how long I worked with them, and just kind of what that year looked like. So up first, my first transaction of 2020, it was actually a buyer who called one of my listings. He was interested in that home, but that home was already under contract. So I ended up helping him find another home. Was able to get him pre-approved with my lender. They ended up qualifying for about $335,000. They ended up buying a house for $335,000. I made a 3% commission on that transaction and made just a little over $10,000 on that transaction. And then my second transaction for this year, for 2020, was actually a referral from one of my friends. His sister had been trying to sell the home with a different agent, but for some reason they weren't able to get it sold. It was sitting on the market. I think it was a pricing issue. But when I took over and they listed their home with me, we ended up listing their home and ended up selling for $327,000. I made a 3% commission on this and ended up making $9,810 from this transaction. Now this listing sold very quick. It sold went under contract within a couple days. But we did all the marketing for it, so there was some marketing costs associated with that, but ended up making a nice commission from that transaction. Now, my third one for that year was actually a friend that I used to work with at a different company years ago. I think it had been like 7 or 8 years since I had talked to him, but we were still Facebook friends. And he would see me post about my open houses, post about my listings, post about the buyers that I was working with. And he ended up reaching out directly through Facebook, said that he was interested in buying a home. He also had a friend that was looking to sell his home. So I ended up getting him pre-approved and qualified, and he ended up buying a house for $387,000. I made a 2.5% commission on this one and ended up making a commission of $9,675. I worked with him for a couple of weeks before we actually found him a home, and he went under contract, and everything was pretty smooth on that transaction. He got a solid deal, had his closing costs paid for, so we were able to help him out and get him into a good place. Then up next, there was a buyer from my lender. It was a referral from my lender. They were a little bit of a smaller budget buyer, but this buyer, we ended up finding him a house for $225,000. I got a 3% commission and made about $6,750 on this transaction. I worked with this buyer just a couple weeks as well. It took a couple weeks before we found them a home. There was a little bit more expenses when it came to this one, just because the home that they purchased was about an hour away from where I live. So we were showing them homes in an area that had a little bit more affordable homes, which, like I said, it's about an hour from where I live. So had to make several drives out there, but we were able to find them a good home and be able to get them to be able to purchase their very first home as well. Then up next, I have another buyer, which out of my whole career as a real estate agent, this had to have been the most difficult buyer that I ever worked with. He actually ended up coming back and sold this place a couple years after, so it was great. But I worked with this buyer for about I'd say close to 7 to 8 months. He was looking at homes, would change his mind, would start looking for homes again. He'd pay off debt. He increased his credit, his purchase limit. So I worked with him for several months before we were able to find him a house. But we ended up finding him a new construction home that he bought for $332,000. The builder was offering a 3% commission rate and ended up making $9,960 off this transaction. So like I said, I worked with this buyer for about 7 to 8 months, showing him easily probably 50 houses before he was able to find something that he really liked and he was able to make an offer. And obviously we ended up closing this transaction, so it worked out for all of us. And then the sixth transaction here was actually a friend of my wife's. She was looking for her first home. She ended up buying a condo actually. We ended up finding them a condo for $257,000. I made a 3% commission on that and made $7,710. I worked with this buyer for just a couple weeks before we found them a condo. They knew exactly what they were looking for, so they were very easy buyers to work with, and we were able to get them to the house and be able to make it a smooth transaction for them. And then my next transaction for that year, number 7, this was that same buyer that I talked about earlier. That was a friend that I had from a previous workplace. Well, he had another friend that wanted to sell his home, and I was able to work with this seller. This home needed a lot of work. We ended up listing it on the MLS. We got tons of activity, tons of offers that came through because the home needed a lot of work. There was a lot of investors that were submitting lowball offers. We ended up getting it under contract, but the buyer ended up not qualifying, so we had to put it back on the market. But we ended up getting a cash buyer that gave us a solid offer. And it was an investor, so I ended up getting both sides of this transaction. But on this one, the home sold for $255,000, and then I made $15,300 off this transaction, which to date, this has probably been one of my most quickest deals to close from going under contract. We closed in under a week, I believe it was. And then my next one, number 8 for 2020, it was a buyer or referral from a friend also. She was looking to upgrade to a new house. We listed their home. It sold very, very quickly. Went under contract in about 2 days, I believe. But we ended up selling this home for $368,000 at a 3% commission rate. And I made $11,040 on this transaction. Up next, I had a buyer friend who was looking for a townhome or a condo. I worked with him for a few months before we actually found him a solid deal. But I ended up getting him under contract, and he purchased the home for $370,000. And I got a 3% commission rate and made $11,100 off this transaction. And then number 10 was actually my parents. I helped my parents sell one of their investment properties. This home was listed on the market for a little bit longer than I would have liked. But the hard part about this home is that it was sitting on a main street. So I mean, if you've ever had a home that's sitting on the main street, you know very well that it is harder to sell those homes, especially on a very busy street. So this home was in the market for about 30 days before we got an offer on it, or an offer that my parents were willing to accept. But we ended up selling this house for $207,000, or sorry, $307,000. I made a 3% commission and made $9,210 on this transaction. And number 11 was actually another friend of my wife's. She had an aunt that needed to sell her home, and I was able to help them list their home. This home also went under contract very quickly, about 3 or 4 days. We ended up listing the home for $292,000. It sold for $292,000. I made a 3% commission and ended up making $8,760 off this transaction. And then number 12 was actually another referral from my lender. This is a referral that was looking for a home. She was a teacher. She was I would say second hardest client that I've worked with, just because it was her first home. And as you know, as a realtor, when you do an inspection, no home is going to be perfect, right? Even a brand new home is going to have things that come up, and she was just a very worried buyer. She was kind of unsure about things, so I had to do a lot of reassuring with her. But we ended up finding for a home for $350,000. I made a 3% commission rate on this and ended up making $10,500 off this transaction. And then number 13, which was the final transaction of 2020, was actually my personal home purchase. Luckily for me, I'm a realtor. I was able to represent myself and ended up getting paid to buy my house. So I bought my house for $365,000. I made a 3% commission rate. On top of that, I got some of my closing costs paid for by the seller. But as far as commission, I made $10,950 off this transaction. So I ended up, like I said, closing 13 deals this year in 2020, which was my first full year in real estate. And I ended up making $130,785. Keep in mind that I was at a brokerage that was taking part of my split for the beginning of the year, and then the rest of the year I was at a flat rate brokerage where they would take $500 each transaction. So that year, after the splits that I had with my brokerage and fees, I probably ended up the year with about $118,000. So I thought that was a great year for my first year. I was also doing it part-time. So I had my full-time income as well as this. So I was able to, do a lot of great things for my family. I was able to pay off a lot of debt and be able to, have a very successful year, in my opinion, especially after the very, very difficult start. So I just want you to know, if you're starting out, you're struggling, just keep with it, right? Keep pushing. You're going to find that client. You're going to start closing those deals. And once that does happen, it's going to be a snowball effect. But it can take time for some new real estate agents, 5 to 6 months, even a year for you to be able to close your first transaction. But at the end of the day, if you don't quit, things will happen for you. You'll have a successful real estate career. But I hope this has been helpful for you to understand, kind of what my first year looked like. And like I said, I know it's a struggle out there, but keep up with it, and things will work out in your favor. But otherwise, don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next video.